So, I mean, it's one of those things that I think is really it's important. But as I said, I'm not being overly critical of this because this is just my way of thinking about it, and I'm sure they have their own reasons for doing what they do. And I always have to remind myself, and this is part of the ass kicking thing too, is that you have to remind yourself, even though you have a lot of experience, you don't always know. You just don't always know. I actually had an experience I guess it must have been in November in the Bay Area. I was out there doing a residency, and I was invited to sit in on a little conference that a group was doing. And I showed up on the second day in the afternoon, and I went to, when I showed up, they said, oh, we're just in these breakout groups, and you should join this group here. They're discussing things that they want to see happen in the Tenderloin. So I was like, okay. So I sat with it. I knew a couple of people in the group. And so as we started the conversation, there was one woman who was just very aggressive. And she was frustrated, and she was so agitated. And everybody in the group was just trying to marginalize her. And they were trying to put her in her place or whatever. And so I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this is really odd. This is not good engagement. This is not good practice. So I said, wait a minute, wait. Let's listen to what this woman had to say. Let's just let her play it out. Somebody had passed out a sheet of paper and they said, these are all the things that we need to be thinking about. And the woman had it, and she was fussing about stuff. I said, so what? Let's let her tell us what on that paper that's not right. And she stopped, she paused, and she looked over and she says, you know what? It's the first time anybody's ever asked me what I think. I was like, I'm a social practice artist. So it's like, I know how this stuff is done. So she proceeds to talk about these things, and she kept kind of going off a little bit. And then I'd say, well, okay, yeah, but you said that, but how about this? What do you say about this? And then she'd go off a little bit more. And I said, but how do you, and I kept trying to get her back, and then other people started trying to get her back on. And then she just goes, see, nobody want to listen to me. I'm leaving. Nobody listen to me. Nobody ever listen to me. And we're all saying, oh no, we really want to listen to you. And she just kept going. She goes, I'm leaving. I'm packing up my stuff. So she starts packing her stuff. I'm like, please don't leave. We all want to hear what you have to say. And she's like, no, nobody want to listen to me. So I was like, okay, social practice ways. Allow her to go to the side and go talk to her. Just tell her, we really want to hear what you have to say. And she was saying, I'm sick, I have high blood pressure, and all this. She started listing all this stuff. So I go over and I kind of lean against her and start talking to her. And she turned around and she goes, don't you understand? You're going to make me have a heart attack. Just leave me alone. I was like, oh my God. Then I realized, I was like, oh shit, you know what? I just walked into something. I had no clue what was going on. These people have been talking to this woman for a whole day, and they know how completely, wacky she is. And here I am, stepped in with my social practice hat, solve the problem. We have to honor the fact that we don't always know, and we have to, allow these moments of learning and take it and just keep going. So another project I'll talk about here is project in Dallas. Glad to have a couple of my Dallas people here, Daryl Ratliff and Carol Zoo. It's good they're here. But folks that are working with me on the project there. But so I was invited by the National Sculpture Center to do a project for their 10th anniversary, and they introduced me to this neighborhood called Vickery Meadow, and it was an interesting situation. As I was told it was one of the most dense places in in the city, and within that blue area there was some 15 plus thousand apartment units, and no commercial, very little public infrastructure. Basically, because it was designed this neighborhood was laid out in the 1970s, and it was designed for basically graduating college students, young professionals, mainly all white. And so, it was designed basically for people to drive their cars into their apartment complex. When they needed things, they'd get in their car and they'd go out into the city because their networks were all over, right? So it wasn't really designed for places, for public kind of space. And when I went there the first time and I saw it, and these are basic kind of apartments that you'll see there, and it didn't look interesting at all to me. And people talked about how, the crime that happened there, that there was always crime and stuff. And over time, and this image that I'm going to show next is not something that's always there, but you never know when it is. I mean, there are these police things that they kind of set up, and I've never really seen these things before. Anybody seen these in their neighborhood? I don't know these things, but I just thought it is very odd though, in a neighborhood where you have these towers that are kind of watching over, and the way that everybody talked about the neighborhood was just supercharged around crime, violence. But what was interesting, there was a contradiction there, because apparently in the late 80s there was a shift in fair housing laws that kind of broke up these single-use housing developments. So they expanded a lot of the one-bedrooms into 2 and 3 bedrooms to accommodate families, and then also with depreciation, the values start going down. So when families start moving in, the properties were going down. So lower income people start moving in. But then in the early 2000s, something else happened. The International Refugee Committee and Catholic Charities chose this neighborhood as a place to locate refugees, basically because there's so many apartments that there were always going to be kind of enough vacancies. And so a neighborhood that was designed as a middle-class neighborhood for mostly single white college grads had become a place that was full of people from all walks of life. And so now it's one of the most diverse places in the city. And the contradiction to me was that, that in America we love diversity. But when a place is really diverse, then it has a negative, people speak of it in a negative way. So I was trying to figure out, how do you work with that contradiction? And how do you find value in a place that is different than what people have projected it to be? And so that leads me to my fifth thing that I think about a lot, is kind of the notion of learning how to see a place instead of making a place. I mean, at a time when we get so much buzz around the notion of creative placemaking, and of course that kind of placemaking is the placemaking that requires an influx of folks like us, right? That's creative class type to give a place value. I'm not at all interested in that as being the core of how we create value. I'm really interested in, it's almost the same as when I start talking about what is art and what is not. How do you look at things deeply and try to find the value that's there? And but I also, I don't go as far as this friend of mine, Roberto Bedoya, who's been pushing the term place keeping. I think I appreciate parts of it, just as I appreciate parts of placemaking, but both to me have a little bit problematic. I mean, the placekeeping thing, I think it can get a little bit stuck, and people don't know how to move into the future because there's such a focus on how do you keep something, and that can be very hindering, I think. And also, I go into these places with the idea of knowing, look, I'm a chicken, right? I lay eggs in places. I don't have any real skin in it. So how do I figure out, how to connect, deeply and internally with the people that are in the place, the people that have the real skin in the game. And so first of all, I started to explore the notion of who was talking about crime, and what do people really think about it. And I found something that was interesting. There was a group of an organization that was looking at things that she called, she had organized something that. Let me start over there. So there was a woman that was testing something a little bit different. I mean, she was saying instead of trying to address, crime through more police, maybe you could address crime through getting people, creating a situation where people could get to know each other, because these people, most of the people in this neighborhood were just thrown there without knowing anyone. And they were easy prey for a lot of the people that lived there. And then kind of, tensions among the different people from different places. So what she did was she decided to have something that she called a mom's lunch. And she would pull, 5 to 6, women from 5 to 6 different countries. It would be anywhere from 4 to 5 women. And they would have lunch, and they would talk about, they would share stories and ideas about, their lives, where they came from. And a different group would cook the food each time. And it was like, and I tried to get in, but it was it was an exclusively women event, which is understandable because it was a place of trust. They wanted to create a place of trust. But I managed to allow them to let me sit in the back one day, and I sat there, and I had one of the most incredible theatrical experiences that I've ever had. Right? Sitting in the back, listening to these women tell stories about their lives, where they came from. I mean, some of them were just so heart-wrenching, right? I mean, women coming from Bhutan who was telling the stories about their 5 children, where, 2 are with them, one's in Nepal somewhere, and the others they don't quite know, and that kind of stuff, And so the stories were really, incredible, but it was also the form of it was incredible because you had 5 or 6 different languages spoken there. So each time someone would say something in their language, it would get translated into English, then it would get translated back out into all the other languages, right? So it was this beautiful sea of sounds that was, incredible. And so I started thinking that's the kind of exchange that needs to happen in a public way. And so I started to kind of also just poke around and look and listen to things. And I saw things like the guy on the right-hand side there selling. I saw several people would just be outside trying to sell stuff. Then it hit me one day, like a lot of the people that are coming from, the countries they're coming from, they're accustomed to markets. And that's how they get together, create networks and that kind of stuff. So I've, put together a team of people, artists and other folks in Dallas that were interested in helping explore this. And we went from on the streets to in public meetings and also into dinners, right? One of the great things about, working on this particular project was the opportunity to go into people's homes. Because people would invite you because they really want to share their culture with you. And so I had wonderful dinners there and talking to people about this idea of creating a market. Can we create a market in this neighborhood that people say people don't come together, people from outside the neighborhood wouldn't come in, and so on and so forth. And but we had this challenge to figure out. So where do we get things to provide in the market? How do we find things to sell? And we wanted things from people who lived there, but we didn't know how to get it. So we would ask people at meetings, if they made arts and crafts and stuff, and most times people said no. But if you look deeper and you push a little bit harder, you find surprises. So for instance, on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side, a colleague was at this meeting and she had just asked the group, said, does anybody make any arts and crafts and stuff? And no one said anything, but then later she was looking at this woman, that black handbag there in front, and she said, oh wow, this is really nice. Where'd you get this? And she goes, oh, I made it. And then it's like, oh, but we've been trying to get people to tell us about stuff, that they make. But what we learned, though, is that people, they didn't really think of it as arts and crafts. It was just things that they did. I mean, they made them when they needed them. And so we thought we needed to have a place that we could identify and encourage arts and crafts making. So we got a couple of apartments in the heart of the neighborhood, and we just opened up open studios. We had a couple of people in the beginning teaching workshops, and artists from the broader Dallas network. But very quickly, artists start to emerge out of those workshops as people who were good artists in themselves, right? So then, all of a sudden, they started to produce workshops. So then we had this thing. It's like, okay, so maybe we should try and test this market out. And the challenge, though, was that people within the neighborhood would not come together because they're from too many different cultures. The second thing was that people from outside the neighborhood would have no interest in coming into this neighborhood because it's violent and there's so much crime and stuff. So we set out to do the first market, and we did it around food. We called it the Lucky Pot. And when we thought maybe we would get 5 or 6 different people to bring food to this market, we were very surprised that on the day of the market, we had about 18 different folks, and it was in all kinds of flavor and presentation. And what was really interesting was seeing how this mix of people from so many different walks of life, could come together in this one spot. And the sharing was just, amazing in terms of, like on the lower left-hand side, this older woman from Nepal is sitting there conversing with this African storyteller, and neither one speaking the same language, but the group of people around them are tuning in to each other in different ways. And but the other thing that was really significant about this, though, is the tree. We call that the big tree, and we chose these apartments in this location because of that tree, because it created a shady place. But also, to me, it was important because it was identified as the most challenging place in the neighborhood, because that was considered the drug tree. It was a place where the drug dealers would pop up and put their drugs in the cracks of the tree and sell. But once we kind of got this thing going, and we had the workshops and stuff going, all of a sudden the big tree started to serve a different function. It started to serve this function where there were these informal events under the tree, whether it's people doing music or games or whatever. So that was something that continued to give identity within the heart of the neighborhood. So then we went on a next step of kind of stepping it up. And how do we do this in a way that kind of layer in more things that we could find within the neighborhood? And entertainment was one that we wanted to do, but not having the resources, we had to figure out how do we do entertainment to kind of deal with this broad cultural interest. And we didn't have a lot of money, but someone from the group threw out an idea and said, why don't we do a talent show? Now, talent shows was not my idea of something that would be a good thing, because I've been to some pretty terrible talent shows. And then the person was making the flyers. It was really interesting because they felt it was important to make sure we had some of everybody's language in it. It was just kind of, so it's like, it's a very kind of folky kind of approach. But, I was kind of blown away by, the outcome of, the folks kind of coming into this market context, and also the entertainment part, right? The entertainment side also kind of, took us a little bit by surprise on the first one because, we lowballed. We thought, if we could get, 10 or so people to perform, we did good, but we ended up with 26, the youngest being a little 18-month-old Somalian girl, all the way to the oldest being an 86-year-old white man doing a hokey pokey. and then you had like all these other things in between, right? And as I watched it, what was interesting for me watching it was seeing how, so you'll have like, the black gospel group that's sitting there watching, this Nepali dance group dancing. And the children from all these, everybody's kind of watching this stuff and really, in a way that you wouldn't normally, you wouldn't normally have, African Americans going and enjoying a Nepali dance thing or whatever. But because of the context of it, within this context, it worked.